Good morning. I'm Wynn President and CEO of the TLL Temple Foundation, and also chair of the leadership committee for our philanthropy advocates. I'm happy to welcome you here to the second day of our virtual conference. I know many of you were probably in the breakfast meeting that ran from 8:30 to 9. We've got a great panel lined up to talk about broadband connectivity in Texas. Three very experienced speakers, knowledgeable. And so I'm looking forward to jumping into the content within. But first, looks like we still do have a few more people joining us coming in this morning. And so watching the numbers run up some. And so give it just another second or two. And then Ellen Ray, I'll be coming to you in just a moment to kick us off on the topic of broadband. Many of you know Ellen is the executive director of the Stillwater Foundation based in Austin, but also focuses heavily on rural West Texas. Ellen is the chair of the Texas Rural Funders, and I've learned everything I know about broadband. Well, started learning everything I know about broadband from Ellen, and she put a real focus on rural broadband before the pandemic, and so we're very glad to have her leadership for Rural Funders. But then also within our philanthropy advocates membership, Ellen and Stillwater have been members for a long time. So Ellen, I'll invite you in now to provide a bit of context and some opening remarks.
Thank you, Wynn, and good morning, all. I'm pleased to be representing the Texas Rural Funders for this session and appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more about TRF with all of you. We are a coalition of 18 philanthropic organizations working to bring additional attention and resources to rural Texas. TRF's fundamental belief is that the future of Texas depends on strong, successful rural communities, and that urban and rural communities are inextricably linked. As we like to say, your food is not grown in the HEB parking lot. Instead, our state depends on rural communities for food, fiber, and fuel, and we all thrive together. Through TRF's diverse network of funders, we address challenges that cross sectors and leverage the many assets rural communities have for success. None of this would be possible without the partnership of rural community members themselves, who are our boots on the ground experts. If you're familiar with Texas Rural Funders, and I know some of you are, you'll know that my fellow members and I are very excited about this morning's session on broadband connectivity. In fact, rural broadband access is one of TRF's signature issues. As early as 2018, TRF linked arms with Connected Nation Texas to work with communities across the state to expand their access to high-speed internet and to map granular level data on where Texans are connected and where they are not. We could have never anticipated that the COVID-19 crisis would shine a direct spotlight on the disparities rural communities experience in accessing high-speed internet for remote work, healthcare, and the reason we're all here today, education. Access to affordable, reliable broadband is critical to participate in 21st century learning, both in the COVID era and beyond. Nearly 700,000 students attend school in rural Texas, and far too many face barriers to remote learning due to lack of physical broadband infrastructure. For these reasons, Texas Rural Funders is joining forces with rural and urban organizations alike to advocate for policies that expand digital access for all Texans, regardless of where they live. If you're interested in this effort, I invite you to get in touch with us to learn more at info@texasruralfunders.org, and we'll put that in the chat. Or of course, feel free to reach out to me or Wynn. And I should add that the reason TRF knows how to do advocacy at the Capitol is all because of philanthropy advocates who have taught us so well and provided a roadmap. So thank you, Jennifer and team. I know we're all looking forward to a rich discussion this morning and hearing from our panel about challenges and opportunities to seize the moment and expand digital access for all Texans. Thanks so much, and back to you, Wynn.
Thanks, Ellen. And Ellen made a few really important comments, and I want to highlight those as we transition into our panel this morning. One, we know this is an issue for urban communities just as it is in rural communities. The solutions look a little bit different because of the infrastructure that's available, but we know there are a lot of disconnected urban Texans. And we also know it has an equity framework to it. Oftentimes, the most unserved communities are low income and home to many underserved populations. And so from the standpoint of equity and a statewide infrastructure problem, you have to think about it in terms of the 21st century and what we need to fully participate. And I think we'll be talking a lot about that this morning with our panelists. We do invite you to put questions in the Q&A box instead of the chat. Q&A will keep it a little bit cleaner for us. I'll be watching both, but primarily directing my attention to the Q&A box to bring your questions into the conversation with our three panelists. And we're going to start this morning with Jordana, but I want you to know we've got Jordana Barton, a Senior Community Development Advisor with the Dallas Fed. We have Luis Acuna, Policy Analyst with Texas 2036, and Lonnie Hunt, Executive Director of the Deep East Texas Council of Governments with us this morning. Each of them represents an organization that has been certainly thinking about the role of broadband over the last 6 or 8 months, but each of these panelists has been working on broadband for more than a year. So these are longstanding organizational priorities. And again, we have the benefit of learning from them this morning. So we're going to start with Jordana. And Jordana, the first question is the Dallas Fed or the Federal Reserve in general. Why is broadband such a high priority for you and your organization? I think you're muted, Jordana.
Thank you. Thank you. Talking away. Digital inclusion is economic inclusion, and the Federal Reserve is responsible for creating an inclusive economy where everybody can participate. So we have to address structural barriers to upward mobility. Broadband is one of those issues that actually intersects with every area of community development and in workforce development, access to workforce opportunities, workforce skills, right? The supply side and the demand side of workforce, attracting industry to low-income or rural areas, preparing workers with digital skills and so forth. Educational attainment and opportunity we've seen so clearly in the pandemic. So all of these reasons, it's a way to attack a structural barrier and create opportunities for upward mobility for families and communities.
Thanks, Jordana. And when we talk about broadband, Luis, we'll come to you next. We're talking about really broadband is a speed, the minimum 25.3 speed. Internet is a word that we use a lot, high-speed internet, broadband, but for the purposes of today's conversation, when we say broadband or high-speed internet, we're talking about a minimum 25.3. So, Luis, why did Texas 2036 establish 25.3 increased access across the state of Texas as an organizational policy even before the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Wynn. Thanks for that question. And thank you for hosting us this morning. It's an honor and privilege to be joined by Ms. Jordana Barton and Judge Hunt and yourself as well. So Texas 2036, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that's trying to make sure Texas is the best place to live, work, and do business in, not just for the current Texans we have, but for the 10 million that we're going to be welcoming in our future. And so we see, same thing as what Jordana was saying, is that we see digital connectivity as a pathway, a tool to help achieve economic prosperity and quality of life for Texans. And so we think that teaching Texans how to utilize and leverage that technology is the new farm to market road for our 21st century. And we need to make sure it's inclusive, and we just think it's the way forward for our future.
Got it. Thanks, Luis. And I do want to come back to this notion of economic prosperity and digital inclusion. As Ellen pointed out, we're here this morning primarily as a group of education funders. And so it'd be great to tease out some of the examples that the three of you have, or what you know about education pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and what you envision post-pandemic education in the workforce. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. But thanks, Luis. Lonnie, Judge Hunt, should mention that Judge Hunt, he actually served as the county judge for Houston County for a number of years. He knows what it means to try to take care of infrastructure in rural East Texas. And now he's responsible for 12 counties through the Council of Governments, DETCOG, the Deep East Texas Council of Governments. Lonnie, same question to you. Why is establishing increased access and affordability for broadband a priority for you and DETCOG?
It's literally our future. We are a 12-county rural region, all rural, no urban centers. We're historically, economically distressed. 6 of our 12 counties have had a decline in population over the last 10 years, and providing broadband access to everyone in our region is really the most significant thing that we can do to turn this around, turn the economy around, and benefit every other aspect of life, including education, healthcare, and just generally improve the quality of life for our residents.
And I know each of your 3 organizations also prioritizes health and healthcare, workforce, and so we might return to some of those themes as well. And again, they're not mutually exclusive from the topic of education that this group, Philanthropy Advocates, cares so much about. We are a group of funders. We're a group of organizations, about 54 of us all, that care about Texas education from pre-K through the workforce, inclusive of higher education. We're also advocates. We believe in the role of philanthropy, working in partnership with others to advocate for improving our systems for education. But we're not experts especially not experts necessarily on broadband. So from the experiences that the 3 of you have had over the last, anywhere from a few years to, I guess, Jordana, more than a decade, what are the messages we need to be communicating to our state policymakers about the importance of broadband, not just in this moment in time, but thinking out into the future of the state of Texas? Luis, as an organization that's focused on our bicentennial, our 200th birthday, what are the things that you think are important for us to communicate to state policymakers about the importance of broadband over the future coming decades?
So what we're seeing is that the COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted the disparities within broadband right now. We saw that there was about almost 1.8 million kids that didn't have access to internet at the onset of the pandemic, that couldn't participate in remote learning when we didn't know what was occurring. So one thing is we really want to see some coordination and partnerships between our state leaders, our local leaders, and of course our private sector leaders with the broadband operators, and trying to figure out a path forward on how to connect everybody and provide some connectivity out there to our urban areas where there's an economically disadvantaged, potentially an economic barrier to adopting broadband, and of course our rural areas where we see there's economic barriers as well to actually going out there and deploying broadband services. So just some partnerships there and creating a discussion on how do we go about alleviating some of those economic barriers to ensure that we're achieving connectivity and access. And then the other piece is the digital literacy piece, and explaining that on how much of an importance that is digital skilling and teaching our future generations and our current population now on how to leverage this tool to provide economic prosperity, as we've been discussing here.
A really good point. We've got to, we think about it, the rural funders, we think about it, is broadband physically available? Is the technology and infrastructure there? And we're agnostic as to which technology might deliver that 25/3 speed. Is it affordable? And so, Judge Hunt, I'll come to you next, but I know from the work you've done that on average, rural East Texans pay 400% more per megabit than do residents of Dallas-Fort Worth. So we're in a region with higher than the state and national averages of poverty, and we're paying on average 400% more per megabit. And then do you know how to use it? Can you use it to its highest and best purposes, Luis, to fully participate in this 21st century, whether that be healthcare, upskilling, education. So stressing that it's not about streaming. Maybe 8 months ago, the first thing that somebody was said, well, I can't stream Netflix, but now we know it's so much more than that. So Lonnie, from the perspective of a former elected official yourself, now one who works with a lot of elected officials, why should we be telling state policymakers about the importance of broadband at this moment in time, but also looking to the future?
This may sound like a broken record, but in Texas, it's true on almost everything, and that is one size doesn't fit all. We need multiple strategies, especially at this early stage where the state is just getting started planning hopefully developing a state broadband plan. Probably the solution that works in our region is not going to be the best solution for everyone else, but we can learn from what everyone else is doing, and they can learn from what we're doing. And the other message is it's going to take money, but it's worth the investment if we do it and do it right. So far, there's been a significant amount of federal money available, not much state money. And of course, we've been fortunate to also get some investment from private foundations such as yours. One thing we could use from the state is matching funds or planning funds, because you've got to have a good solid plan together before you can legitimately go ask for a large sum of federal money to build out a broadband project. And a lot of times it just, it takes money to get started, and we don't have that money in our local community. So we could leverage a little bit of state dollars to get a huge benefit from the federal funding and foundation funding, I believe.
We'll come back and talk some about the planning and the importance of planning in just a bit, Lonnie, because I know it's a big aspect of the story in the DETCOG region. You've been leading that effort now for more than 2 years. And over the course of time, you put a plan together. It's posted in the chat box, the case for broadband in DETCOG. And now you do have a proposal that will serve like 60% of the households in those 12 counties, if I'm working from memory, but a large percentage of unserved households will be served. And the planning, you wouldn't be here without it. And then it brings to bear the question of funding. And so we'll come back to that. Jordana, I know the Dallas Fed is a big advocate for community level planning. So we can certainly, again, we'll come back to that topic, but as you're thinking about the future moment in time out to the coming decades, what should we be communicating to our policymakers about this issue?
I think our policymakers, one of our key messages can be that we have currently strong laws in Texas that allow local governments to invest in fiber infrastructure for all the things they need to do, public safety and running governmental, their municipal government, county governments, and so forth. I think just protecting those laws and making sure that we're encouraging them for economic development, for having a lot of, once you have a middle mile fiber to run your government efficiently, you can do all kinds of things for the last mile, public-private partnerships with internet service providers, where they don't have to. One of the difficulties with the internet service providers is for them to justify to their shareholders that they can invest in fiber infrastructure or broadband infrastructure in general in low-income communities or underserved areas, right? The cost is higher, right, to serve. So if you partner, create awesome public-private partnerships, you can cost-effectively create resilient communities. So, that's one thing. So barring, right now we see in our laws, we see internet access as a luxury good. It's not considered a utility. So barring, regulating the industry and where you would set a price, right, that everybody could afford, and you would require, in addition to giving them subsidies, which we do now already, provide ISP subsidies, but what we can't do right now, because we're not in a regulated environment, is require them to cover low income or rural areas, right? It's so barring, making it broadband a utility, we have such great opportunity and great laws in the state of Texas to support local governments, investing in this infrastructure, which is the infrastructure of the digital economy of the fourth industrial revolution. It's fiber, and fiber makes everything else possible. All the wireless solutions that you can do for the last mile, for example, awesome wireless solutions, they're made possible. They're looking for the first fiber. Wireless is 99.9% wired. So it makes it's a wonderful investment to have a great economy for efficiency, for public health and telemedicine, for closing the homework gap, as we're doing in San Antonio and Dallas and Brownsville, Texas, with some demonstration projects that are going on right now. So all that investment just creates great opportunities, efficiencies. One of the great laws in the state of Texas is the Interlocal Cooperation Act, and local governmental entities can partner and share infrastructure too. So it creates efficiency, creates opportunities, like I said, for public-private partnerships. You know, getting to the internet is not a mystery. You know, you need an internet service provider. So if you create that middle mile, you can partner with the internet service provider to have more cost-effective solutions for communities. So it's all of that it opens up, and I would like for policymakers to understand the current laws. We've you know, explained those laws, and just for them to know the opportunity to invest in the opportunity for local governments to create a great future. It's been important during the pandemic. We're no longer explaining that it's a problem right now. It's been brought into high relief. So we have the solutions right before us. The key is for local governments to become owners rather than renters, creates efficiency. Everybody wins. That's what I'm responsible for at the Federal Reserve, is coming up with win-win-win solutions. And I feel like that's what we have the power to do, really, with under current laws and regulations.
And I know you're a huge fan of the interlocal agreement option. And so I do want to come back in just a minute. Well, I have a similar question about local policymakers, local leaders, and I'd like for you to give maybe an example of where you've seen that interlocal agreement play a key role in a real place being able to make progress on this issue. So we've got a panel specifically of legislative leaders coming up next. Chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House, the chairman of Senate and House Public Education Committees. Are there specific messages related to appropriations and the education, again, public education, that we should be sending? You know, Lonnie, what would be the top thing, you know, that if you could only say one thing to these three leaders coming up next, what would that one thing be?
Make sure your investments require that everyone be included. You can't just throw money out there to improve broadband, because what will happen is areas that already have it will get better broadband, which is a good thing. And maybe a few areas that don't have it will get something, but unless we leverage regions or even the state population to ensure that everyone is included, we will still have too many places in rural Texas that never have this opportunity.
So a message of inclusivity, and also ensuring that anything that we do really takes into, I think, the scope and scale of Texas, which, you know, we have several 100,000 households that are unserved. 90% of those are in rural places, which I think, again, you know, Jordana's point about the role of fiber, but each of the organizations here today is a believer in fixed wireless as well, and other technologies, again, dependent on fiber, but we're not saying that every home has to have fiber up to the door. Luis, if there was one thing that you could say to these next three legislative leaders, what would your single message to either appropriations or the chairs of House and Senate public education be?
Well, I guess it's going to be more than one thing that I would like to say to them. I know they're going to be dealing with many challenges with the upcoming budget and the shortfalls that we have. But as Judge Hunt was saying, and Jordana Barton, an investment is needed for our future. And so, yes, we need planning, we need an office, we need better maps, but we need to do more in order to close this digital divide gap. And that is equitable allocations of funds that we have here to help local governments actually fix the problem. And I was saying before, partnerships with them. That's what I would explain to the chairman of appropriations, and just saying, yes, the policy is going to be handled with the plan and stuff outside of his committee. His committee has the purse strings that we can tap to provide equitable allocations of funding across our state. The other thing for our public education is just, again, teaching digital skilling literacy within our classrooms. and also in our libraries, and making sure that is becoming a core knowledge for our future generations. I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but leveraging this tool to help advance their future and their quality of life. If Texas wants to be the best place to live and work and do business, we're going to have to be doing work and business in our digital technology. What did Jordana call it? A fourth industrial revolution. That's where it's going to be taking place. And we need to make sure we have the right workforce that can actually participate in there effectively.
Yeah, for sure. And you said something really important, that broadband is not an end in and of itself. It is a means to a lot of really important ends. It's that farm to market road, or maybe the 6-lane interstate that we need now. And unfortunately, we haven't invested in the same way in our digital infrastructure as we have in our physical infrastructure. So I want to come back to that. There's a question in the chat about the state of municipal fiber. And so I probably, Luis or Jordana, you might have the best perspective on that. But what does the municipal internet look like, internet, broadband and fiber look like in Texas today? So one of you might come back to that in just a moment. But Jordana, what's the single message you would send to these next 3 legislative leaders that we have coming up?
I would say, I would back up Lonnie and say that funding can go to specific projects. Like the councils of governments have had some great examples. Lonnie is leading one with the DP East Texas Council of Governments. The Brazos Valley Council of Governments also has a 350-mile fiber ring and connecting health facilities. And now with they're going to have fiber extensions into each of the towns, and they'll be able to do some of those last mile innovative solutions to bring telemedicine and close the homework and remote learning gap and create workforce opportunities and so forth. That is important, that local governmental entities like councils of governments, like municipalities, like county governments can be given flexibility to meet the broadband needs. So investing in their own middle mile is important, because then they have an asset to leverage and to partner with, right, to create value there, and make everything cost effective to create very resilient communities. So that's what I would ask for, in an environment like we're in now. That is one of the most important ways to get to the economic development. Cities, local governments are responsible for economic development in their regions. And this, like we just said, is the highway system of the 21st century, or the 4th industrial revolution. Broadband networks broadly, right? Fiber-based broadband networks are the highway. So for commerce and for the well-being of families, for access to healthcare, especially with the closure of rural hospitals, that connection is going to depend on broadband access for all the range of things you can do with telehealth and telemedicine. We were forced like 5 to 10 years ahead with the pandemic, and many of us had our first telemedicine appointments with our doctors, but many people couldn't do that transition that Governor Abbott asked for clinics and healthcare facilities to close to in-person and provide through telemedicine. Well, the people who are on the wrong side of the digital divide, rural and low-income areas of urban areas, could not gain access to healthcare. This is a public health danger for us, not being able to respond, for people to do the kind of social distancing, right? For access to healthcare, for access to groceries and connecting with their loved ones, accessing work opportunities to work remotely. All of that we've seen very clearly with the pandemic, but what it has done is just pushed us 5 to 10 years ahead in the digital economy, and showed us our vulnerabilities very clearly.
Got it. So Luis, I come to you for this question about municipal broadband. And I don't think the question was really about municipalities being able to be the ISP, but just kind of what's the state of service in our municipal areas. And Lonnie, I'm going to come to you next, because I think the economic impact of what we've learned about the future through that 12 county feasibility study with the jobs and the growth of GDP is a good segue over to why local leaders need to be focused on this. But I want to come to Luis first and say, Luis, we know equity is an issue in urban areas. The 25% of kids in Dallas ISD that didn't have the internet were largely low income, Black and Hispanic. the 40% of kids in Aldine ISD around Bush, IAH, the unincorporated Harris County. Those 40% of the almost 70,000 kids in Aldine ISD were largely low income, Black and Hispanic. Again, the municipal areas tend to be lit up more with fiber, tend to be more access, unless you're in a low income zip code. And so can you talk some about what you know there about the state of broadband in municipal communities?
Absolutely. So, and I think another way to scope the problem too, to add to it, is that I think some data that's out there is 3 million households. And when you turn that over into how many Texans, that's about 7.8 million Texans that have infrastructure within their area, but they're not adopting it. And they're not adopting it because affordability reasons, or they just don't want it, or they're getting internet from their cell phone, based on data that I've seen. And so some of the stuff there and some of what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic was a lot of local leaders started stepping up, and it was very encouraging to see that. And some stuff that I've seen out in San Antonio is utilizing their dark fiber. There's a bunch of infrastructure that is within municipality areas. It could be dark fiber. What I've learned from Jordana, it could be your skyscrapers or the buildings that you own, that you can hook up some antennas on there and start zapping some internet to some households. So I think that we can start leveraging their assets, and as I was saying before, partnering with some of the broadband operators there and figuring out you're the service provider, we have the infrastructure, how can we enter into a partnership to help provide internet to these low income households, to help give them the tool that they need to participate in remote learning, telemedicine, e-commerce, all that stuff. And so that's something that I'm seeing there is a lot of local leaders just starting to step up and figuring that piece out. I know there's some barriers that is prohibiting them from actually maybe achieving some of these goals. And that's something that we may need to seek addressing in the next legislature. And we can learn from other states that we've seen that have removed some of these barriers or actually achieved some of this stuff. And so just scoping out what's going on in the other states and how they've reacted to it and how they've prioritized where municipal governments fall into providing this access. That's something that we need to look into and start advocating to our state officials on pulling back some of the barriers that they have for deploying this stuff.
Thanks, Luis. And I think that you've hit on a really important point that I just posted a link to a Pew report that highlights how other states are expanding broadband access. Been looking at the statutes there from other states, bills and statutes that were passed in the recent years. So Texas is clearly behind. It was said earlier that we're one of only 6 states without a broadband plan statewide. We're disadvantaged for certain federal funding. There's a question in the Q&A about what we need or prefer in terms of federal funding, especially related to any future COVID-19 relief fund. But currently we're at a disadvantage because we don't have that state plan, and Texas 2036 and the rural funders are advocating for that. But one of the things that comes through in this Pew Trust report is that states that are ahead of us, they put out a few $1 million and connect a few thousand households. And on a scale in some of the other states, that's a lot. But when you're talking about the number of disconnected households in Texas, on a Texas scale, we've got to do something that matches the scope and scale of the problem in our state. And Lonnie, you're thinking about this from a regional perspective. The 12 counties, again, of the DECOG region, which is, I think, the most rural COG. We don't have an urban center. Lufkin is the largest community at 35,000 people in 12 counties. But you're thinking about this across 12 counties. You're thinking about it from an equity standpoint, about essential infrastructure. So talk some about what the planning process has done, how you have engaged local leaders, because the mayors and the county judges in the 12 counties you represent, this is their highest priority now, I think, or one of them. And so how have you seen this issue take shape, not over the last 6 months, but over the last 2 years? And what role did the planning process play in that? And how did it set you up now to be thinking about serving the majority of the households in your 12 county region?
Well, we actually started, I believe it was February of 2018, so about 2.5 years ago, that we allocated some funding. It was disaster recovery funding that had come to us literally from Hurricane Ike, which was over 10 years ago, but it was the remaining deobligated funds. And we were looking for a good use of it to benefit the whole region. And there was a consensus that everybody was talking about broadband at that point, and people were complaining they didn't have internet. We didn't have good cell phone service. A lot of people tie internet and cell phone service together. And so we had a lot of people around the region complaining about the problems and nobody really knowing what to do about it. And we just came together as the leaders of our region through our board of directors and decided we have to have a plan before we go start asking the federal government or anybody else for money to address this problem. We want to have a serious plan and know what we're going to do and where we're going. It didn't take long to figure out, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, that if our COG, our Council of Governments, did not step up and do this in our region, there's really no one else in Deep East Texas to do it, because it is going to take a regional approach and leveraging the population of the whole region. We already knew there were lots of problems. The study that we did, which was about a $500,000 study, we used a division of Ericsson. So it was a big name worldwide organization that's recognized as an expert in broadband and internet and technical. It gave it a lot of credence, I think, to the study. One of the things that opened our eyes, and you already alluded to it, Wynn, is that for the folks in our region that have broadband, we pay about 4 times as much for it as our neighbors in Dallas-Fort Worth on a per megabit basis. So it's very inequitable. And the reality is internet is not out there through much of our region, but if it was under the current model, many of our people still wouldn't have it because they would not be able to afford it. So we went into this with 2 basic guiding principles. Broadband has to be available to everyone, no matter how remote they are, and it has to be affordable. We saw in our study that I think this was an eye-opener that really helped solidify support and this was a relatively conservative estimate, that if we could light up our region today, and we know we can't just flip a switch and do this overnight, but if we could, and bring broadband to the entire Deep East Texas region of 385,000 people dispersed over 10,000 square miles, larger than 6 other states, we would create over 10,000 new jobs in 10 years and a GDP growth of $1.4 billion over 10 years. That'd be huge anywhere, but especially in a rural, poor region like ours that has always ranked high in poverty and low in income and low in educational achievements and low in health outcomes. It's more than just a huge thing. It's truly a game changer. And this study not only talked about the economic benefit, but it talked about the societal gains. And education was at the lead of the areas. Education was first, healthcare was second, as far as the societal impact of bringing broadband to our citizens.
Hey, Lonnie, can we fast forward? Becky, maybe move down to the map and just give us the highlights of what you've been able to accomplish through the feasibility study to the network design planning process. And just tell us, so we've got 12 counties on the map here, lots of colors, but bottom line, what does it mean if you're able to pull this off?
This is our plan for phase 1 of our regional broadband network. All of the shaded areas, the purple or whatever color that is, and the orange over there in the right part, those are areas that would receive wireless broadband between 50 and 100 megabits download in phase 1 of our project. The reason the map looks like this is the funding we're going after to fund this is CDBG funding. And CDBG program targets low income, low to moderate income households. And so we had to create a contiguous service area, and this is contiguous throughout our 12 counties. And we had to include all of our census blocks that were a majority of low to moderate income households. And so that's what we did. We took the LMI census blocks, we connected them using other census blocks that maybe weren't quite 50%, but were close to 50% LMI, and we end up with this map. And this represents, you see about 3 of our counties would be completely covered. And by the way, those are our 3 poorest, most rural counties, with the fourth one over here on the far right that would be close behind, almost fully covered. This represents about 58% of our population, and of all the households located within these shaded areas, almost 52% qualify for the HUD definition of low-income households. So we feel great about this for a lot of reasons. Number one, it gives us regional-wide coverage and a footprint that would allow us to expand and build on it in the future to cover those other areas that aren't included in phase one. And then number two, it really targets the people who need it the most, the low-income households across Deep East Texas.
Got it. Thanks, Lonnie. So when you think about an equity standpoint, equity across 12 counties, equity with the income perspective, using cutting edge technology, fixed wireless that does rely on fiber. So, you notice that green trail around those 12 counties, that's the fiber backbone that Jordana was talking about earlier. So Jordana, I know fixed wireless, you're a big fan of it. I want to come to you next and talk about a very specific example, maybe where you've seen the interlocal agreement play a key role. And then Luis, I'd like you to be thinking about the role that broadband plays in the election process. It's kind of an interesting question. And so broadband and elections, we know this is going to be a digital session. So how do you participate in democracy if this is going to be a digital democracy if you don't have access to broadband and the internet? So would you think some about that as Jordana gives us this I'll give you a big philosophical question to answer, Luis, but I'm going to give you some time to think about it. I'll come back to Jordana with a local example.
Yes, I just, Wynn, we should probably mention rural co-ops that are critical. We can come back to that, but there's one in particular, there's several that are doing great things and becoming internet service providers, and they have access to the rights of way. They know how to serve rural customers. But GVEC, I've been looking at the impact that they're having on the schools they're serving and so forth in rural areas, and just the efficiencies and the high speed. And they became a WISP, right? They're invested in their fiber, and they became a wireless internet service provider for the last mile as well. So just a great model. But looking to the Interlocal Agreement Act, in San Antonio, the solution that the mayor's office has set up the meeting where I would present a solution to our COVID-19 Social Services Committee, and it's based on interlocal agreement. So using the existing fiber of the city of San Antonio, the COSANET network. Luckily, San Antonio has invested in fiber because it has its own energy, CPS Energy, municipal-owned utility. And on that network, they have an agreement with their utility that they will have their own network. So we have that asset. It had never been used to close the digital divide. Except through very important work of libraries, connecting the city libraries to each other and making that available in libraries, making internet connection available in libraries. But as far as in the home fixed internet, it had not been used for that. So basically I just deployed a model of using the point to multi-point architecture. And it's basically what the interlocal agreement is going to include is the city government, the county government, the school districts as governmental entities, the universities. Right now, Texas A&M University has stepped up in big ways. And basically the reason partnership is so important is for efficiency, for sure. But also what you get when you're good at partnership, and basically you create a governance structure also where other partners besides governmental entities have an equal say or a strong say as well. So that's what the act affords you. But basically it creates synergies, because what you said, Wynn, is critical. Broadband is a means to an end, right? It's not the end in itself. So yes, one entity might have excellent experience and assets in fiber infrastructure. That's important, but it's not just a technical fix. When you get partnerships going, you get efficiency. You have shared resources, so you don't have to duplicate, and then you get all kinds of innovations, right? So instead of, the city was thinking of hiring out for a help desk for the new people that would get connected to the internet with this private wireless network. And we said, no, let's let Texas A&M knows how to run a help desk for students. Let's include the high school students from low-income schools that are going to be newly connected, right? They can get training in IT, customer service, how to run the help desk, work with the successful college students. That's one of the most important interventions in education, is have students of different levels working with each other. And they can do so much with experiential learning as they're learning coding and computer programming and testing applications on their own network, right? So if you would just think it's a technical fix, you wouldn't get all those assets. You might not include a partner, a governmental entity like Texas A&M University that has such great assets. Not only that, they're going to conduct the evaluation, not just for the 2 demonstrations in San Antonio, but for the whole project. And they're going to be able to help us know how to move forward, which technologies are working the best and so forth, but also the educational impact and telling the story as we roll out across the city in 50 low-income zip codes in San Antonio, but also to the world, right, to be a model and a useful model of the impact on education and so forth. So that's what the Interlocal Agreement Act offers, where the whole plan in San Antonio is based on that, and it's all about synergy. We've done the same with our the county, the CPS Energy, and the city for our public safety radio system. This is a similar kind of network for closing the remote learning and homework gap. One of our Edgewood demonstration is also looking into opportunities for telemedicine because of some real great clinics there with one of your members, Methodist Healthcare Ministries. And just some great opportunities there. But basically, it allows for this. What we haven't had in this country is permanent infrastructure in low-income and rural communities, broadband infrastructure. These private wireless networks are permanent infrastructure. When I saw the millions that school districts were spending, each one, on mobile hotspots, paying the highest, even if they got a deal, it was still not sustainable, and it's still short-term Band-Aid fix, right? When for a fraction of the cost, you could have permanent infrastructure in low-income communities that could have all these benefits. And basically, it's just aggregating households, creating efficiencies to get to the ISP. Industry, enterprises have this. Many companies, right, have private wireless networks, but they don't pay for each of us individually as employees. The same, we're just saying students, low-income school districts, rural areas deserve the same advanced technology and network architecture that can close whatever the community decides it wants to close, the remote learning gap, the access to healthcare, access to financial services, access to workforce opportunities. All of that is possible when you have permanent infrastructure in low-income communities. The ISPs win because they get more business from their big contracts with governmental entities. They have to order more gigs to run these networks, right? And likewise, the community ultimately wins because there's permanent infrastructure, and we stop that cycle of disinvestment and underinvestment in the very assets of our economy. The assets of the digital economy is our broadband infrastructure, from the towers and poles to the fiber to the wireless last mile solutions. So we're trying to intervene right now to say we can do a lot better, and we can invest in low-income communities because it's much more cost-effective than any alternative that we've been able to determine.
Thanks, Jordana. You made a couple of points. Thank you for bringing up the role of co-ops, incredibly important, especially in rural communities, and they've demonstrated their ability to serve rural communities for a century almost. Second, this notion of the incredibly high cost of short-term solutions when we haven't been planning for the future. And Chromebooks and a hotspot are not a long-term solution. Most of the communities that I care about that don't have adequate broadband infrastructure also don't have adequate cellular infrastructure to support the kind of 21st century effort that we need to be included. So I really appreciate you making those points and for giving some concrete examples about local communities. We've got about 10 minutes left. I have 3 questions, and so I'm going to come to each one of you individually and let you respond to a question, but also let you kind of include your final thoughts. And so see if you can hit the question quickly and then also make any closing thoughts you want to. Luis, I'm going to come to you first about elections. Lonnie, I'm going to come next to you about this notion of federal funding. And you work a lot with grant programs. You're trying to take advantage of a grant program now at the state level, but it's federal money passed through a state entity. What should Texas be asking for or thinking about in terms of the next federal stimulus related to broadband? And then finally, Jordana, I'll end with you, give you a chance to make a final thought, and also address this question of scale. What do we need to be thinking about from communities to the state to make real progress on this at this moment in time? So Luis, give us your thoughts on the election and the session, and how do we participate in a 21st century digital digital democracy, inclusive of elections, if we don't have the digital infrastructure?
Absolutely. So I thought, I was thinking about this, and it's came to me, information and engagement. When we think about elections, it's really efficient for me to just go to the Secretary of State's website, type in my information, and see if I'm registered to vote. And then I'm able to figure out, okay, am I registered to vote? Am I not registered to vote? And if I am, then I'm able to figure out where my voting location is. I'm able to figure out how much is that wait time in certain areas. And so I think that's a huge win for us voters that are trying to figure out, how can I go out there and vote? Am I registered to vote? And where can I go to go vote? And how fast am I going to be, how much time am I going to be wasting standing in line? So I thought that was really good. And I think you see a lot of engagement as well with the information being distributed out to people. Especially, I've seen a lot of reports that the youth engagement is up, and that's very exciting. I think that's very exciting for our democracy, seeing youth being engaged in our democracy process, because I think it was really low way back when, and even in recent times. But just seeing them being actively wanting to participate in our democracy is really, I think, really cool, to be quite frank. And in terms of what do we need to be looking at, or my last parting thoughts to give some time to everybody else is, I think we need to be, as I was saying before, plan, office, data, that's all good and everything, but we need to be thinking more than that. We need to be thinking about how do we break down those economic barriers, and how do we focus on the digital skilling. And so we see a lot of all the other different democracies out there, meaning states. How can we learn from them, and how can we bring some options here to Texas? Is it the tax incentives? Is it funding? What's going to work here in Texas? And that's something we need to be thinking about.
Thanks, Luis. Appreciate it. Appreciate you being here with us today. Lonnie, federal funding. What are the things that we should be asking for or thinking about? What does Texas need out of an upcoming federal stimulus package focused especially on broadband?
Just more money. I mean, but again, it has to be wisely invested money. I don't think we'll solve the problem by just throwing money at it. There has to be some logical planning to ensure that we have inclusivity and equity, and that everyone is able to participate in this wonderful thing that is broadband, not just depending on where you live in the United States of America. So definitely more funding is needed. Again, multiple strategies, I think. So I don't think we should try to put all our eggs in one basket. One thing that I'm a little concerned about is, because we've been working on this now for 2.5 years, we're ready to go. I'm a little concerned that at the state level, they're just starting to develop or talk about the need for a state broadband plan. And I have a little concern that someone may say, why don't you guys over there in Deep East Texas just wait a little bit? We're working on a state plan. And all that's going to do, you know, with the legislature meeting once every 2 years, these things need to be accelerated. The speed of technology is accelerating daily. We can't afford to approve a planning process this biennium and then come back in 2 years and look at the results of that and figure out what we're going to do. And then it takes 2 or 4 years more to actually build something. We need to find regions like ours that are ready to enact sound plans and figure out a way to get the money to them to help them do it, and then learn from that whole process and duplicate the effort other places.
Thanks, Lonnie. Appreciate you again being here in your service as a judge and now representing these 12 counties, and for sharing your experience of how you actually can get something done on a regional basis. I think it is a model. Jordana, talking about getting things done, from communities to counties, regions, states. What are your thoughts on how we scale this for Texas? And then any final thought as we wrap the session up?
Yeah, well, I think we do what Lonnie is talking about. He has a plan. I'm sure he's using the Interlocal Agreement Act to have the partnership between counties and local governments and creating the efficiency that way to build the network. How do we support? There are many communities that have gone through the planning process like Lonnie. Let's not pretend that that doesn't exist. Let's identify those and let's create funds. The Community Reinvestment Act is one area that I worked on immediately when I was studying this issue because it was brought to my attention by the lowest income area of the country. I was studying the Texas border colonias, the rural areas and peri-urban areas along the border, the very low income, lack of access to basic infrastructure. I wasn't looking at broadband. They were talking to me about not having access to the internet. So, and what it meant to workforce opportunities to their children in school and all of that. It became real. I had to learn, not just, I didn't want Band-Aid approaches. I wanted to know what we could really do. So talking about scale, we can come together, CRA, the NAD Bank, for example, along the border that's responsible for infrastructure, state funds, federal funds, come together with pools of funding for projects like Lonnie's, like one of the most beautiful capital stacks I've seen is the Brazos Valley Council of Governments. Their 350-mile fiber ring, they got a federal grant from the FCC, Connect to Health grant. They got funding from a bank, financing from a bank, and then some grant dollars from philanthropic sources and banks. That is a beautiful capital stack that we try to develop in community development. Let's do some of that, and it's all about partnership. If any one entity like the state or the federal government thinks it can solve it on its own with money, Lonnie is exactly right. That, you know, you can, most of the plans that I've seen are about giving more funding, subsidies for the ISPs to solve it, right? But there's no requirement to solve it. So it's there's a disconnect there. So how do we partner with them? And, you know, all the parties are very important in these solutions, but like Lonnie said, it's going to take comprehensive community development is basically what we're doing. But creating a fund is a great step for the state, for the national government, and we can come together in unique ways and create capital stacks that work for projects like Lonnie's, where you go in with a lot of value, and because of the partnerships, you're able to create synergies. And I would say also, long-term, you know, the way we brought rural electrification was through the co-ops. When the market was regulated and they went in to serve, our co-ops, there was one little addition to the bill last session that said co-ops couldn't use their current fiber to provide broadband. They would have to establish a different entity. And so that's not efficient. That was kind of like, oh yeah, you can do it, but it's going to be a little harder for you to do it. Let's do things to make it easier for rural co-ops, like this great example, GVEC, and the efficiencies, the connectivity they're creating, and becoming a WISP themselves, a wireless internet service provider for the last mile. It's just, they're blowing it out of the water, showing with real numbers the savings to school districts. And that's the kind of economy that we need to create, and economic opportunity. So with that, I would say we can come to scale through partnership, using the Interlocal Agreement Act and beyond, working with hospital systems are stepping up. I'm meeting with kind of every day because they finally realize, right, that they can invest in telemedicine, right, innovations and technology, but if they can't reach the very people we need to reach to create efficiency, to manage our biggest health disparities, access to care, our biggest diseases like diabetes and so forth. I've shown in my publications how great telemedicine is for creating access to care, and some examples of models that have been demonstrated this. Healthcare is the biggest creator of jobs in our whole economy in the United States, certainly in Texas. Our Heart of Texas report showed how important it is to many communities. We've seen the closure of rural hospitals. Let's do something right now. This is an investment that can solve multiple problems because it's an intersecting issue, and you get all of that benefit. So look at all the partners we've just between us have talked about that can come together. We know how to do this. We do community development. We know how to bring the right people to create efficiencies and the scale that you're talking about achieving in Texas. So trust your local governmental entities. They're right there with the people responsible for addressing those needs. Invest in their own flexibility, their ability to partner with ISPs and co-ops and so forth. So thank you.
Thanks, Jordana. We are at time, but this has been a jam-packed hour full of information. We've gone from policy to what's actually happening in communities. This is something that we can solve, the role of public-private partnerships. We can spend a lot more time on that. The good news is this is a conversation we can continue. Each of our three panelists is very available. I turn to them each all the time. They're very open to continuing this conversation individually. Thank you for sticking with us. We started with 80 panelists and 80 participants. We're down to 72. So folks stuck with us for the conversation. We have another panel coming up at 10:30. So come back for that legislative leadership panel at 10:30. Thank you all. We will be following up with the links. And if we were in person, I would say let's give a round of applause for Jordana, Lonnie, and Luis. But some point in the future, we'll have you all with us in person so we can do that. Thanks, y'all.